Today we are going to discover a man who said that God spoke to him, and that voice changed history forever. He was not a king, not a general, not even a free man. He was Nat Turner, an enslaved preacher who dared to rise against one of the most powerful systems in the world, slavery in America. In the summer of 1831, something happened in a quiet county of Virginia that shocked an entire nation. It was called Nat Turner's Rebellion. A few men, armed not with soldiers' training but with faith and fury, stood up to the impossible. Who was this man? What made him believe that he could fight the system that owned his very life? And why did his story become a symbol of both fear and freedom for centuries to come? Dear listener, today you are not just going to learn English. You are going to walk through history to hear the heartbeat of a man who refused to stay silent. So, sit back, listen carefully, and prepare yourself for one of the most powerful true stories ever told. The life of Nat Turner, the preacher who rose up. Chapter 1. A Child Marked to See. The story begins in the fields of Southampton County, Virginia, in the year 1800. A child was born in a small wooden cabin, a child who would one day shake the conscience of a nation. His name was Nat Turner. From the very beginning, people said he was different. His mother, Nancy, was an enslaved African woman, strong, faithful, and protective. His father escaped when Nat was still a baby, leaving behind only whispers of courage and defiance. But the old women on the plantation said something strange about Nat. They said he was marked by God. When he was born, his body carried unusual marks, shapes that his mother and others believed were signs from heaven. They said, "This boy is special. He is chosen." And as Nat grew, he began to believe it too. He was quiet and thoughtful. While other children played in the dust, Nat stared at the sky. He loved stories, especially the ones from the Bible. Even though teaching enslaved people to read was forbidden, someone, maybe the white children of the plantation, showed him the letters. And soon, the boy who was never supposed to learn became a reader. Imagine that moment. A little boy sitting near the firelight, holding a torn page of the Bible, whispering each word slowly. God said, "Let my people go." Those words burned inside him like a secret flame. He began to dream about freedom, not only for himself but for everyone around him. Every Sunday, when the enslaved families gathered to pray, Nat's soft voice would rise above the others. He would read, speak, and pray with such passion that even adults stopped to listen. Soon they began calling him the preacher boy. But life on the plantation was cruel. He saw people whipped, families sold, children taken away. The world around him was full of injustice. Yet even then, Nat didn't turn bitter. He turned inward. He prayed, he fasted. He said he could see visions, pictures and signs that he believed came from God. And each vision told him one thing again and again. You have been chosen to lead your people out of darkness. He was still young, but his heart carried a weight far too heavy for a child. He looked at the fields where people worked under the sun and thought, this cannot be God's will. Years passed. Nat became a man, calm, serious, and deeply spiritual. Even the white people who owned him noticed that he was different. They often called him to preach to other enslaved people because his words made them quiet and obedient. But they didn't know that deep inside his heart, a storm was forming. He preached peace on the outside, But on the inside, he was asking a question that no enslaved man was allowed to ask. If all men are created equal in God's eyes, why are we slaves? And each time he asked, that quiet voice from within seemed to answer, "One day you will rise." That day was still far away, but destiny had already chosen its path. Nat Turner, the boy marked by birth, taught by faith, and shaped by pain, was waiting for the sign that would change everything. Chapter 2. The Preacher and the Prophet. By the time Nat Turner was in his 20s, he had already become a man both feared and respected. Feared, people were afraid of him. Respected, siwakik, people admired him. He didn't shout or command loudly. Instead, he spoke softly, but his words carried power, like thunder hidden behind clouds. Wherever he went, people listened. Some said his voice could calm a crying child. Others said it could shake a sinner's heart. And soon the plantation owners began to see him as useful, a preacher who could keep their slaves obedient. They allowed Nat to move from one plantation to another, spreading the word of God. But what they didn't know was that Nat's understanding of that word was far deeper and far more dangerous than they imagined. When Nat opened the Bible, he didn't see the message that slaveholders wanted him to preach, not obey your master, but let my people go. He looked at the story of Moses, who freed the Israelites from Egypt, and he whispered to himself, "If God could do it once, he can do it again." At night, when the fields were quiet and the stars burned above, Nat would lie awake, staring at the darkness. He said he saw visions, bright lights in the sky, blood dripping from leaves, and words appearing in the clouds. Visions, pictures or messages seen in dreams or imagination, often believed to be from God. He believed these were signs from God, messages telling him that something great was coming. One day, while working in the field, he saw a strange phenomenon. The sun appeared to be darkened like an eclipse, and Nat felt his heart pound. He whispered, "The Spirit speaks." He believed it was the same Holy Spirit that spoke to prophets in the Bible. From that day, Nat Turner stopped being just a preacher. He became a prophet. He told the people around him, "The last shall be first, and the first shall be last." It was his way of saying, the oppressed will rise, and the powerful will fall. His followers began to gather in secret, small groups meeting in the dark woods. They prayed, but not just for forgiveness. They prayed for freedom. Nat taught them to read signs in the sky, to listen to dreams, and to believe that God was preparing them for a mission. They called themselves the chosen few. But even prophets feel fear. Nat knew that if his words reached the wrong ears, he would be killed instantly. So he continued to preach peace in public, and revolution in whispers. Revolution, a complete and often violent change in political or social order. Still, he waited for the final sign, the one that would tell him it was time. Then came the year 1831. The air was heavy and strange. The moon turned a deep red one night, what many called a blood moon. Nat looked up and said, "The time has come." The quiet preacher had become the prophet of fire. And soon the world around him would burn with his vision. It was August 1831, a hot and heavy summer in Southampton County, Virginia. The air itself felt strange, thick, almost electric, as if something powerful was waiting to happen. Even the birds were quieter than usual. Nat Turner had been silent for weeks, He no longer smiled, no longer laughed. He spent his nights fasting and praying, waiting for the final command from God. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned red, Nat whispered to his followers, "The Lord has shown me the sign. The time is now." They gathered in the woods, away from all eyes. The men came quietly, Henry, Hark, Sam, and a few others. All were enslaved men, all with hearts full of pain and hope. Their faces glowed faintly in the moonlight. Nat held a small Bible in one hand and a wooden staff in the other. He said, "This is not our fight. This is God's will. He will guide our hands." For a moment the forest was silent, only the sound of wind passing through the leaves. Then one man asked softly, "But Brother Nat, are you sure? So many will die." Nat's eyes filled with tears. He said, "We are already dead, but tonight we live as free men." That line, dear, was said to echo in every listener's heart, soft but powerful. They planned to begin at Travis's farm, where Nat worked as a slave. He knew the place well, every room, every creaking floorboard. That night they would start the rebellion. Rebellion, a fight against authority or control. When midnight came, the world felt still, unnaturally still. The group of 6 men entered the Travis home. They carried axes, knives, and courage, nothing more. The first blow was struck by Hark. Within minutes, 4 white people were dead, including Joseph Travis, Nat's owner. The house that had once been full of power was now silent. Nat turned toward his men and said, "Let it begin." By morning, the rebellion spread from one plantation to another like wildfire. More enslaved men joined, some willingly, others out of fear or confusion. They moved quickly, striking at night and disappearing by day. For 2 days, they traveled through the county, freeing slaves and killing slaveholders. More than 50 white people were killed. But Nat's army never reached the size he dreamed of. Some enslaved people were too afraid. Others warned their masters. And soon, the news spread faster than they could move. White militias, armed with guns and horses, came rushing from all directions. They were furious, terrified, and ready for revenge. In the chaos, Nat's small army began to scatter. Men who had been shouting songs of freedom now hid in fields, barns, and forests. Within days, the rebellion was crushed. Hundreds of black men, even those who had nothing to do with the revolt, were captured and killed. Nat Turner, the preacher who had seen visions of light, was now hiding in the darkness of the woods. He survived like a ghost, alone, silent, hunted. For 6 long weeks he hid in holes, swamps, and tree roots, surviving on little food and prayer. And still he believed, somehow, that what he did was divine work. Divine, connected with God. Holy, Chapter 4, The Capture and Confession. It was October 1831. The rebellion was over. The fires had turned to smoke, and the forests of Southampton County were filled with silence. Heavy, painful silence. Nat Turner was alone. For more than a month he had been hiding in the woods. Weak, hungry, and tired, but still alive. He moved only at night, crawling through mud and drinking rainwater from leaves. Everywhere he looked, soldiers were searching. Hundreds of men with dogs, guns, and torches hunted him like a shadow. They burned forests, searched barns, and questioned every enslaved person they could find. But Nat was clever. He hid in holes so small that he could barely breathe. He covered himself with logs and leaves. Sometimes he listened to soldiers talking just a few feet away. and they never knew he was there. For 6 long weeks, he lived this way. And in that time, he said he prayed more than ever. He believed that even though his rebellion had failed, God's plan was not over. Then, one cold morning, while hiding under a pile of trees in a small cave-like hole, he heard footsteps. A white farmer named Benjamin Phipps saw something strange. A piece of cloth moving slightly in the ground. He lifted his gun and said, "Who's there?" Nat slowly rose from the hole. His clothes were torn, his face thin and tired. He didn't resist. He simply said, "I am Nat Turner." The man stared in shock. The most wanted man in Virginia was standing before him, calm and quiet. He was arrested and taken to the Southampton County Jail. Crowds gathered outside, shouting and spitting, calling him the devil. But Nat remained silent. He did not beg for mercy. He asked only for one thing, to speak the truth before his death. And that's when a man named Thomas R. Gray, a white lawyer and journalist, came to see him. Gray wanted to write down Nat's story, his life, his thoughts, his reasons for rebellion. For several days he sat in Nat's cell asking questions. Nat spoke calmly, explaining everything, his visions, his faith, and his purpose. Gray later published those words as a small book called The Confessions of Nat Turner. In that confession, Nat said something that shook the entire country. "I was not Christ, but I was strongly influenced by him. I was ordained, chosen by God, for some great purpose in the hands of the Almighty." He explained that he believed he was sent by God to punish the evil of slavery, that every vision, every sign, every voice he heard came from heaven. When people asked him if he felt sorry, he said softly, "Was not Christ crucified?" That one sentence showed his mind, calm, unbroken, and full of faith. On November 11th, 1831, Nat Turner was taken from his jail cell to a place near the courthouse. The crowd gathered again. Hundreds of people, shouting and angry. Some wanted to see him cry, but he didn't. He looked up at the sky and whispered a prayer. He said nothing else, and then the rope was tightened. The body of Nat Turner hung still, but his ideas had already escaped into history. Later, his body was treated cruelly. His head was removed, and his skin was taken as trophies by the same people who feared his faith. But even in that horror, his story refused to die. People whispered his name for generations, sometimes in anger, sometimes in fear, but for the enslaved, it became a secret prayer for courage. Nat Turner's rebellion had lasted only a few days, but his words, his vision, and his faith would live for centuries. Chapter 5. The Legacy of Nat Turner. After Nat Turner's death, silence fell over Southampton County, but it was not a peaceful silence. It was a fearful one. The rebellion was over, but the shock had just begun. White plantation owners across the South were terrified. If one man with a Bible and a dream could create such chaos, what could happen if others followed him? In the months after the rebellion, panic spread. Laws were made even harsher. In Virginia and many other states, it became illegal to teach enslaved people to read or write. Illegal, see, not allowed by law. Preaching without permission was banned. Gatherings of black people, even small prayer meetings, were watched closely or broken apart. The white rulers thought they could stop another rebellion by controlling knowledge. But they were wrong. Because Nat Turner's story, his faith, His courage had already entered the hearts of thousands. Whispers began to spread from one plantation to another. Did you hear what Nat Turner did? Did you hear he saw signs from God? He fought for freedom. For enslaved people, Nat became a symbol of resistance. Resistance, fighting against unfair control or oppression. He was not seen as a murderer. He was seen as a man who stood up when everyone else was forced to bow down. Even though his rebellion failed, his message survived. Freedom is worth everything. But among white Americans, opinions were divided. Some called him a monster, while others, especially in the northern states, began to ask deeper questions. If people are willing to die for freedom, maybe slavery itself is the real crime. Nat Turner's rebellion became one of the turning points in American history. It pushed the nation to face the truth that slavery could never exist peacefully. Years later, during the Civil War, 1861-1865, when the North and South fought over slavery, people remembered Nat Turner's name. Many soldiers, especially black ones, saw themselves as continuing his unfinished mission. And long after the war ended, Nat's spirit continued to inspire new generations. Writers, activists, and freedom fighters across history spoke his name. Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Malcolm X, and even Martin Luther King Jr. knew that his story was part of their own struggle. In the 20th century, artists, poets, and filmmakers began to tell his story again, sometimes as a hero, sometimes as a warning, but always as a man who refused to accept injustice. Injustice, unfair treatment, or lack of fairness. In 1967, a famous American writer named William Styron wrote a novel called The Confessions of Nat Turner. It became very popular but also caused controversy, serious disagreement, because Styron was a white man telling Nat's story from his own view. Many African American writers disagreed, saying Nat's real voice must come from his own people. Then, in 2016, a powerful movie called The Birth of a Nation brought his story back to the world. It showed not just the violence, but the pain, the faith, and the hope of a man who believed God had chosen him to break chains. Today, almost 200 years later, Nat Turner's name is still spoken. In classrooms, in books, in songs, and in whispers. Some call him a rebel. Some call him a prophet. Some call him a killer. But everyone agrees. He was a man who changed history. Because Nat Turner proved something timeless. You can chain the body, you can silence the voice, but you can never imprison an idea once it's born. And that idea, freedom, became the seed that grew into a revolution of hearts. Nat Turner is gone. His body is gone. The fields are quiet again, but his voice, his idea, his courage, those are still alive. He was just one man, a preacher, a dreamer, a prophet. He did not have armies. He did not have power. All he had was faith, a vision, and the refusal to accept injustice. And yet, he changed the world. Today, we remember Nat Turner not just for what he did, but for what he represents, that even the smallest voice when guided by truth and courage can shake mountains, that even in the darkest times, faith can give light, that one human being can make the world question itself, its fairness, its morality, and its humanity. Dear listener, Nat Turner's story teaches us more than history. It teaches us about bravery, faith, and the power of ideas. And it teaches us a secret that every learner must know. Learning a language, like learning freedom, takes patience, courage, and practice. Step by step, word by word, you can achieve something that seems impossible, just like Nat did with his faith. So, the next time you feel small or powerless, remember Nat Turner, and remember this too. You can listen, you can learn, you can rise, because your voice, your idea, your courage is stronger than you know. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If you loved this story, keep listening, keep learning, because every story you hear is a step closer to mastering English and understanding the world.